Excited.
Sounds good. So I think we'll get started. So just a couple of practical points. If you could mute yourself during the talk, that would be fantastic. And before we get onto the talk, just as a reminder, and I'll put the link into the chat, this is the third webinar, I think, in this series, and we have all of our webinars online, recorded for you to look at whenever you would like. We have another couple of webinars coming up in the new year, which are also on that website in January and in February. So if you're interested in any of those, please look at the Scottish Arctic Network webinar series page, and you can find all the information there. So today we are delighted to have Angus from Accessibility in Polar Research, who is going to tell us about Access Polar and the need for disabled inclusion and representation in polar research. I think this is a really apt topic, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you've got to say. So over to you, Angus. And the webinar is being recorded. Is it being recorded right now, Dario? Yep, so it's being recorded. So just to let everyone know about that. Cool. Over to you, Angus.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. So, of course, you've got myself in this call from Access Polar, but you've also got Charlotte, who I'm sure might be waving at the screen. I can't see her, but hopefully, who will also be on hand if you have any specific questions that I can't catch, because I actually can't see the chat. So hopefully, yeah, Charlotte could intercept them potentially. But let's get started in that case. So what I want to do today is just give you a run through of who Access Polar is, who I am, who the committee are, who the people that actually are running this. And then I want to get into the actual meat of the topic, and that's, the disability perspective in polar research, what barriers we face as researchers with disabilities, what you could do to help us out, and also what type of resources are needed in the community to start making real change. So it's quite a lot, but I'm confident we're getting through it. I think we will, but I know we will. I've timed it. So let's get started. So APR it was a UK organization, but we've now expanded into the US, which is fantastic. It's an absolute weird fever dream to even say that we're an international organization now. And we're made up of 6 volunteers, all of which are in full-time PhD or postdoc. So we dedicate a lot of our free time to this, which is absolutely something we're more than happy to do, because we've all faced adversities in STEM because of our disabilities. So we really, really are so incredibly dedicated to trying to increase the accessibility side of things for polar researchers with disabilities. And it's amazing that we're here today talking to you, because we're about 2 years old now, and we started in the pandemic, and we were just Zoom conferences from our bedrooms and offices, and now we're in international and local talks. So thank you so much for having us today. It's really amazing to be actually showing what we do now. Who am I? I think it's probably worthy that I introduce myself. So my name's Angus. I co-founded APR originally with 4 other people. And we actually all met through the British Antarctic Survey, through the Polar Horizons scheme. So it's nice to see we've got some BAS people in the call. So a warm hello to them. Not only that, I've got disabilities. So I've got learning difficulties, I've got hypermobility. So an interesting combination for navigating the STEM world, but something that I'm absolutely confident can aid me in my scientific endeavors. And I'll talk more about that a bit later. Not only that, I'm also LGBTQ+ in STEM, so I rep on the Pride side of things as well, which is really also starting to gain traction about how STEM is being changed in that department. So that's excellent that that's really starting to be pushed out. And as some of you might have heard at the beginning, I'm a PhD student in astrobiology. So these 2 photos of myself on the right, where I'm looking like a creature out of ET, wearing a weird Tyvek suit, and also looking at some geological formations. We're on a recent trip to Iceland. But my main research looks at how extremophiles are dispersed in geothermal aerosols, and then how that can link to how we can detect life on one of Saturn's moons, which is really cool, I think, really cool bit of research. But I actually did my master's at Aberdeen, so I recognize some names in the chat as well. So not only is there myself, but you've also got 5 wonderful people, Charlotte of which is in the call, and a dog called Luna, who we've dubbed the official APR mascot. But all these wonderful people are just so fantastic trailblazers in STEM that I highly recommend you going and checking out their research. Most of them, in fact, all of them but myself and Ian are marine related folks, oceanographers or marine biologists. And Ian is a rocket engineer. So you're either got marine science or space sciences between us all, which is quite entertaining. So now that initial introductions are done, the boring part's over, we'll talk now about the disability perspective. This is like one of the big things that I really want to convey in this presentation, and it's what it's like to be disabled in science. And we reference this article by Marks and Bayer so much because they just sum it up so fantastically well. And it's this quote here, which says, "We are expected to work extra hard to fit into the current academic culture, and so we expect similar effort from institutional leaders to think legally or beyond legally required accommodations and support all scientists." I think that quote spans multiple historically excluded groups. You know, we're working so hard to hit that baseline amount of work that we can do in an environment that is actively discouraging us from doing that work. So we're expecting that similar effort from institutions to ensure that our accommodations are met, that we're in an environment that we can thrive in, and that we're also in an environment that we feel safe in, because that's a huge other aspect of it all. So I should really remake this slide as the historically excluded groups perspective, because I just think it really spans everything. It's a fantastic one, and I recommend checking out the article as well. I can send the link around in the chat after I finish presenting if that would be useful. So navigating STEM can be incredibly tricky. And at one point, I have looked like 1, 2, or all 3 of these cats, I think, particularly the one on the far right, you know, that expression that is stunned. I actually don't know what that looks like. Stunned silence, but also feeling happy. I don't know. But absolutely, I'm sure we've all looked like this at one point. And it's a tricky place. STEM is not an environment in which you can thrive in unless you're so incredibly dedicated or you're this sort of cookie cutter, I don't know how to put it, but cookie cutter type of researcher that fits in everywhere. And that's the type of thing that we want to change through social media outreach, through various public engagement activities that we've done, through workshops like this one where we explain what barriers we actually face, and then through conferences and created initiatives. And I'll touch more about the initiatives that we work on a bit later. But what I do want to say, one of the first things that Access Polar did was when we set up was to understand what type of work we need to do to help the community of disabled researchers. And what we did was we designed a survey to understand where we can best place our resources and understand what major barriers there actually are in STEM for us. And we identified 3 particular ones, and I'll just go through them now. So the first one is related to fieldwork. This is a big thing within the disabled community. So there are these really big outdated policies, these big blanket policies that are based on what we call a 2-dimensional diagnosis of a disability. So as an example, I know diabetes is a big disability that unfortunately and completely immorally sometimes can mean that you don't get to go to the polls. So as an example, if you're filling out a fieldwork form and you put that you've got this disability or a disability, more often than not, a fieldwork organizer might see that you've got a disability and think, okay, that's not safe to go to the field for you, for me, for the team, whatever. And it's based on a 2-dimensional diagnosis of they see the disability, they think you can't go, you're not safe. But what we're really trying to encourage is a 3-dimensional diagnosis when it comes to these fieldwork applications. And what I mean by that is if you filled out your form and said you had diabetes, instead of the fieldwork organizer going, okay, they've got a disability, you can't go anymore, they need to see, okay, you've got a disability. Can the person manage that safely? Can they ensure that their coping mechanisms can be accomplished on the field trip? And if so, then that means they can go to the field. So it looks at a disability with a more 3-dimensional perspective. And that leads me nicely onto this second point, which is the opinion of the researcher with disabilities is often not considered when these fieldwork applications are completed. So as an example, if this person with diabetes puts on their fieldwork report or fieldwork application that they have a disability, they should also be able to say that I can safely manage my medication, I can safely manage myself in the field, and nobody else has to worry. That opinion needs to be trusted over the fieldwork organizer, because we as people with disabilities are, I suppose, experts in our disabilities. We know how they can be managed and how we can manage them. In fact, a lot of coping mechanisms that people with disabilities have to manage their disabilities are practically invisible to the naked eye of those that don't know what they're looking for. So we truly feel that the opinion of the researcher should be the top priority there. If they say they're safe enough to go to the field, then they're safe enough to go to the field, and they should be allowed to go. And lastly, this was one that Charlotte is our digital accessibility guru. So perhaps Charlotte a bit later will be able to talk more on this. But we realized during the COVID pandemic how digitally inaccessible I suppose the world of STEM actually is. And I want to show you this with a visual aid that I will also explain. So this is a typical color palette that you see in conference posters, in presentations and everything like that. And it's something that has got big primary colors, you know, strong primary colors that are easily differentiated to folks with regular eyesight or no issues with their eyes. But when you look at this particular palette through a filter that can show you how varying people with different colorblind issues see this palette, this is how it turns out. You know, you can see that actually a lot of those colors are lost. They're not easily differentiated anymore. And it means that not only can we as people with color blindness issues or we as people with disabilities not read your research, but it was also disadvantageous to yourself, because it means that you can't communicate your research as well as you would have hoped. So being digitally inaccessible is quite disadvantageous for everybody. You know, it's an issue that spans a lot of communities, and it's something we're working toward fixing. So hopefully, depending on my work schedule, because as Will alluded to, December is a horribly busy time, we're trying and working on some new digitally accessible color palettes that are free to use in your research. I'll provide one at the end of the session. But we've got quite a few more that are looking to get published. So hopefully they'll come out soon, and I can send those around and everything. So they'll be easily around for you all to see. So what I want to explain now is, I'll go a bit slower on this bit because this bit's quite interesting, we think. This slide in particular, multiple talks that we do, is something that is quite popular. So I want to talk more on this one. And it's our experiences and how our disabilities can actually help our scientific career and how they can actually make us better scientists and researchers, which I think is a nice way to look at it. One of APR's massive things is that we want to put a positive spin on everything. But a huge disclaimer here is that not a lot of people who share disabilities see it as a positive. So I have learning difficulties. I've had my fair fight with them, but I ultimately see them as a tool that can help me. But I know other folks with learning difficulties that see them as something they don't want. They don't want to have them. They never wish they had them. So I want to put a disclaimer here and say that we're not generalizing everybody with these disabilities and saying they're positive. What we're saying is that we feel in our specific situation, that we feel they are positive. So what I want to do is just explain a bit more about what I mean here. So for myself, I have dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, which I feel is so ironic because I can never spell or say them. They just need to be simple words, don't they? But I feel as though that these disabilities, okay, they mean I'm slower in mathematics, they mean I'm more difficult to grasp a concept, and they mean I actually have very large difficulty reading, which in science is a massive hindrance. But actually, they make me more motivated, they make me driven, and they mean I creatively think about a hypothesis and can tackle it from a different perspective, or I can tackle it from a perspective that somebody without learning difficulties might not have thought, because I tend to visualize things a lot rather than read it in text. My neurodivergence means that I can get fixated on a question, which is a good and a bad thing. bad in that I find it difficult to move away from the research question, but good because it means that I tend to throw a massive wide net to get in all the information that I need to answer that question. I'm sure there are others with disabilities that would agree with me here, is that disabilities can give you certain tools that can actually help you. I know sometimes, and a lot of the time they don't, but you just got to find that nice positive from it. So in general, though, I mean, diversity, whether or not it's disabilities, whether or not it's LGBTQ plus, gender, race, or whatever, it makes research stronger. It makes it more safe. It makes it varied, and it puts in opinions that actually are more applicable to the situation than other people have. So fields generally miss out on our talents by being exclusionary. And I think that that's a nice sort of sum up of our experiences. I mean, maybe Charlotte later on can talk about how her disabilities can be a positive, and I'm certain I can dig out recordings from our other committee members who talk about how their disabilities are a positive. But our general consensus is that, you know what, we have them, we own them, but also they can help us out. So ways forward, you know, hang on, this GIF isn't playing, but actually maybe that's a good thing because oh, there you go. In testing, the GIF keeps playing and it gets annoying. But for those that can't see it, it's just a couple of cats with some lightsabers. I know, right? What you're thinking, why am I talking about cats and lightsabers? But what I mean here is that ways forward, lots and lots of people have so many different opinions, initiatives, and things to address to really change STEM. And what's really nice to see is that people debate and fight over which initiative or which way forward is the best. And what's so fantastic is that when you realize that people are debating over which initiative is best, it means that so many people are actually incredibly dedicated to changing STEM, which is just so fantastic to see. So it's a good thing that people are arguing over what change or what way forward is excellent. But APR has some not specific directives that we go down, but we have some ways forward that we like to push a little harder than others, both because these are excellent ways that we can really convey our message, but they're also things that we do on top of our full-time work. So at the moment, we've got an accessibility survey out, and that's in the QR code on the right, which I'm hoping works. If not, I can send the link. And what this survey is aiming to do is just collect the experiences of researchers with disabilities in STEM, collect those experiences so we can understand what are the big issues, how can we tackle these big issues, and then hopefully collate all these survey responses into a big document that will be published in a journal, which we are working on now. And it will basically be a document or a resource that can be sent to fieldwork organisers, it can be sent to institutions, it can be sent to whoever wants it or whoever doesn't want it. In some cases, we will still send it. But it's a document that can be used to just really improve accessibility and ensure things are being practiced that can help us out. So I encourage everybody to fill that out, whether you or not you have disabilities or not, please go and fill it out. There's some good bits in there about some ways forward that other companies have ran that we're trying to get some opinions on to see if they're a good way forward. So yeah, I just really encourage everybody to fill that out. It closes in December, late December, but I think it could always be extended to January. We're not going to close the form down. So if yeah, go out and fill that one out. Other ways forward that we do are these workshops. You know, I say workshops or conferences, or we've had sort of, I suppose, working groups where we've taught about allyship and stuff like that. So we feel that these workshops can allow us to not only talk about the issues quite candidly, but it means that we can also raise awareness. And I think a lot of the time people forget that raising awareness, even though it's quite a basic thing, is the thing that matters the most. You know, more people know of this issue, more people are willing to help. Like the gentleman at the beginning said, you know, they're here to help and see how they can use our information to better improve fieldwork. And we couldn't do that without raising awareness first. So absolutely 100%, if you want to change something, raise awareness towards it, get the message out. And lastly, as of now, actually, when I made this presentation, we didn't have funding, but now we actually got our first bit of funding, which I'm so thrilled about. And we're going to put this toward various amounts of things. But one of our big things is we really want to do a project or a paper or I don't know, something that is entitled Attracting Researchers with Disabilities into Polar Research. So actually candidly talking about these issues on paper and explaining how future generations or future researchers, lecturers, students, all that type of thing can actually create an environment that will attract researchers with disabilities into polar research. Because at the moment, polar research is changing. It's becoming safer. It's becoming more inclusive, which is so fantastic. But we've got a long ways to go. And I can touch more about that in the Q&A if people wish to hear it. And as I'm conscious of time a little bit. So what I want to just say on our last slide here is that we've got a color palette that you're more than welcome to use. This is free. You can take a screenshot, or I can send the slide or send the color palette. And this is something that you can use in your research. It's something that you can use in your graphs or in your text or in your posters. And it's completely accessible. All colors except the white on the end are okay to use on a white background. And it just is a color palette that we've gone, I mean, Charlotte and I made this color palette, and Charlotte will attest to this. We took weeks trying to work out what colors go with what colors, if we can see it, if others can see it with different issues, and this works. So we're proud of this one. This one was an original one. So feel free to take that. And the RGB codes there are provided. So I think you just either need to convert them into hex or use an eyedropper tool. But as I say, we'll have a few more coming out that are a bit more jazzier, that have got some brighter colors or different things that can attract different audiences to posters, I suppose is the way to put it. But I hope that was informative. I realized that was actually quite quick. I've made good time. But please feel free to contact myself or any of our committee members. I'll go back to that slide. So yeah, feel free to reach out to any of them as well. If you have any advice that you want to get, if you have any feedback for this presentation, or if you just want to chat, or if you want some validation about your disabilities or want to know how you can be a better ally, please let us know. We really are here to help. But yeah, I think that is everything. Aside from, of course, the Q&A later on. But thank you all very much. Do you have any questions for me, I suppose?
Thanks, Angus.
I've got one.
Okay, we
Yeah,
can go straight to the Q&A, yeah.
We're straight in.
So who was that was speaking? David, was it?
Yeah, can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay, just one thing which has always been an issue for me. I'm not actually a researcher, but I work for the British Antarctic Survey in the Net Zero team. And one thing I've really noticed, and I've tried to recommend to colleagues who want to help but who aren't disabled, is health and safety is often the argument used. And it feels to me that very often it's being used as a get out clause to avoid a proper discussion with me. And I've often tried to say, don't never use health and safety, but just be aware when you mention it in front of someone who is disabled, there's a good chance they've got their hackles up the minute you've mentioned that, and they're expecting a fight. So think about reasonable adjustments, not about health and safety.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a topic that at the moment, you know, we as researchers are trying to solve. I feel like health and safety can be incredibly weaponized. And I think it can be that sort of blanket that fieldwork organizers may hide behind. It's something more recently we've noticed is getting more and more specific to different disabilities. It's instead of being this massive broad thing, it's being used to target specific disabilities like diabetes is a big one. But I mean, I'm so happy to hear that you really are really wanting to change that type of health and safety narrative. What type of things would you feel like you want to get from me information-wise regarding health and safety?
Just what we can really do to try to combat this and work with it positively, because I think although it's right, everything you're saying, health and safety is weaponized, it's used to counter general disabilities, it doesn't help if we as disabled people see health and safety as a rude word or as a dirty word, quite simply because someone who really cares about that really is trying to help, and may not realize what they're saying is, one, causing offence, or two, the disabled person may not realize that actually the person they're talking to really is trying to help, but isn't aware the word they're using is causing the trouble. For example, I think that I could take the marine course for the SDA, or I could look at possibly going to the Antarctic on a field trip to see how our net zero measures are working. But if I suggested that, health and safety would be the argument that would say we can't take this any further.
Yeah, I mean, you've summed up that so well. It's fantastic to hear you speak. I think one of the big things that we've tried to understand recently is the experiences of other researchers with disabilities when they hear the phrase health and safety, and when they are with researchers or staff or health and safety members that actually want to help versus with those that don't want to help. And what we found is that those with health and safety officers that really want to get you to the polls, even if fieldwork isn't allowing it, we found that those health and safety officers are more understanding. They understand your perspective. They are actually willing to help you and willing to advise you on who to go to get that validation to be able to go to the polls. I wish I could provide a really good answer, but it's just a topic at the moment that not a lot of researchers with disabilities are able to, I suppose, solve. It's something that we're really trying to put our resources towards. And in some instances it's working and some it's not. Yeah, I mean, our thing that we'd love to do is just collecting these experiences and trying to understand how health and safety officers or how health and safety legislation can be done on a three-dimensional basis rather than, as you say, being a word that is often associated or has negative connotations. Yeah, it's a really tough one to answer. I don't know if Charlotte has anything else, but it's tough.
Yeah, I'll just add on a little bit. So I guess from a health and safety officer point of view, if your person with a disability you said the words health and safety and their guards have gone up, they've got ready for a fight essentially, because they know the battle, they know what to expect. We've all been through it before. It's making sure you as the health and safety officer are reassuring and making sure they're aware that you're not trying to demonize their disability or make them seem negative. You're trying to help them get there as much as possible. Like Angus was saying, the best health and safety officers for people with disabilities are ones that are trying to encourage you to go, not automatically saying, nope, you've got this, you can't go. It's the people who are being like, okay, right, you have this, how can we adapt what we're doing to make this a fair opportunity for everyone to go to, if that sort of thing makes sense.
Angus, I just wondered, could you maybe unshare your screen just so we can see?
Oh, of course, yeah. There you go.
Thanks very much for your question, David. We can maybe come back to you. We have a couple more questions, one in the chat. Gillian, you have your hand raised. Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, actually, it was more of a comment. It was about the colour maps. I've seen a lot of colour maps shared that are said to be perceptually uniform and suitable for people with colour blindness, like the ScAN colour maps and the CET and Ocean Data Viewer and so forth. Are you saying that those aren't actually, okay?
I can take this, Angus. So it's a difficult one when it comes to displaying data. So like you're mentioning the Ocean Data Viewer, because obviously standard colour maps are used. For temperature, you use like a red to a blue and that sort of thing. But the colour maps that we were talking about are ones for use in presentations and for like more textual documents. We haven't done any work on making good colour maps for data view as such yet, just because that's a whole avenue to go down. But essentially it's just making sure you've got enough of a contrast between the classes and stuff.
But actually, forget I said Ocean Data Viewer, that's a bad example. Things like the ScAN colour maps that are for presentations, that, you know, the documentation on them says that they are suitable for, that they are accessible for people with, you know, colour blindness. Are you saying that that's not true?
Well, I don't know, obviously, from specific examples, I'd have to go and look, but essentially everything that comes out that organisations release is meant to be compliant to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so the WCAG guidelines, and they state that there's a specific contrast ratio. So, for example, that red Microsoft, the typical red Microsoft font, that colour that's used is not actually accessible on a white background. It's not enough of a contrast, so it's graded on like an A, AA, and AAA, I think it is, scale. So if they're saying it is, then hopefully they've taken that into account. But I saw there was another one about RGBs of colour palettes that don't work. So I'm just skipping questions because they kind of relate to what I'm talking about. There are websites you can use to actually check those contrasts, and if you've noticed on a document that you've made that your color contrasts aren't matching, then you have the ability to change it. If you know something, an organization who claim they're colorblind, if you can raise it to us, we can always go and raise it to them, and be that sort of front. But hopefully, if they're saying they're colorblind accessible, they would have taken these guidelines into account.
Hang on, are you talking about text?
So yeah,
I'm talking about figures.
So it's sort of the same principle. So this is what I was saying before about how it's really difficult with graphs and figures and all that for the color contrast, because color is used to distinguish, like for example on the line plot, color is used to distinguish the different lines. There's no question about that, and sometimes that can be the best way to display it. It's whether you've got enough of a contrast between the color of that line and the background color.
Oh.
So if you're for line plots, for example, if you're using a red shade and you're using it on a white background, like I mentioned with the typical Microsoft red shade, if you just go and choose a slightly darker one, you're more likely to have that enough of a contrast. But then you've also got to make sure there's enough of a contrast between your different lines that you're using. So I understand with line plots it's very difficult, and it's something that I want to try and make a document about with APR to discuss those sorts of things, because yeah, there are some really good examples of people who have done them, and I'm sure we can dig them out. I've seen a few on Twitter. But it's also, if you are thinking that yours isn't as accessible as it could be, you can always use that alternative text feature as well on your figures or in your figure description to kind of help the viewer to understand if it's not making sense.
I've never seen an alternative text which is remotely useful.
That's interesting. Well, we better get our guidance out there for alternative text a bit better.
We've got, probably on Twitter somewhere, I made a formula about how to write alt text for scientific figures. I will try and find it by the time the presentation's over. If not, I can get it distributed around somehow. But if you follow that formula, it will be able to succinctly explain the scientific figure in alt text. I'll try and find it.
Great, thank you.
And just to add to that, if you see any culprits of people, organisations, feel free to send them to us. We can get in contact and give them some more advice. Don't feel like you need to be that one person to go to speak to them and say, you're doing this wrong. We can say it in a nicer way, essentially.
Sorry to interrupt very quickly. I don't see where your contact details are. Could I be sent those?
I will pop them in the chat now.
I can't read the chat.
Oh, okay. So
we can send them round afterwards to the participants. That's fine.
Yeah, sorry, I can't read chats. That's my problem.
All right, that's fine. We'll do that. Thank you for your question, Alice. You have a question in the chat. I don't know if maybe you want to say it yourself. Otherwise, I can just read it out. No worries. Okay, so Alice asks, how possible is it for researchers external to Antarctic programs to find out about policies on health and safety and fieldwork, etc.? I.e., how much transparency is there about things like the blanket diabetes policy?
I can jump in on this one. It's a very, very good question. In terms of getting access, also hi Alice. Alice and I've met before, so this is fantastic. In terms of getting fieldwork health and safety documents, I'd suggest going to the organisation first. It's probably something you've already thought about, but there likely will be a team or a person, if funding is not great on the organisation, that can give you those right documents. Likely, I've got it from HR departments before, so that might be a very good start. In terms of transparency on these documents, there's not a lot. So the best place to actually get information on that transparency will be the disabled researchers themselves, who have actually had to go through that fieldwork document. I can give some names in a separate email or something of people that you could contact, or in fact, actually, if you do a quick search on Twitter, you'll be able to find some. Well, I know, Charlotte, you work in a well, I suppose a comfort oceanography company. What type of thing?
So just relating back to what Angus is saying about the documents, I've seen documents from specific organisations before in reference to the blanket policies. They'll quite often have no or maybe if being considered. So that's how you can kind of justify where there is this blanket policy. If your disability or condition is in that no column, they're essentially not even going to really consider what's being said. So reaching out to the organisation, if you can't find it already accessible on their website, first of all, they need to make that information more clear to you on the organisation's website or in their documentation that they provide when it comes to doing field work. If not, reach out to them, because you have every right to see that document before you apply, first of all. Like, you're not going to waste your time on an application if you're then going to be told you can't do it, or they seem to think you can't do it. Yeah, that's what I have to add on that.
I'll also jump in and say, in reference to your earlier point in that question, Alice, is that to get access to these documents, as Jennifer said, you don't have to be a polar researcher. You can just contact the department and then hopefully get that document itself. Yeah, exactly what Jennifer said there. I think aspects of it are 100% based on medical grounds, and ask the organisation if you were, yeah. I think, yeah, 100%. I think a starting point would be the HR department in that organisation. I can't think of anybody else.
Perhaps the fieldwork organiser group.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless there's
if you know who's organising a specific research cruise or a specific group, you could always contact them.
Yes, that's a good point.
In my experience, if you're doing polar research and you have to get a medical to do it, then you contact the organisation or the fieldwork organiser or something, and they will say, this is a question for the medical staff. And in my experience with the British Antarctic Survey, the medical staff will give you an answer when you ask, is such and such disability going to mean a blanket no? The US Antarctic Programme, on the other hand, will not give you an answer. You have to go through the entire medical, taking a fair amount of time, costing about £1,000 in order to get an answer from them, which is fecking ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ludicrous, isn't it?
The money barrier on the fact that as well, like the fact that you have to pay to find out if you're allowed to go. That is just
more likely than not, it'll be a no.
Yeah,
exactly. And then you wasted your money to be told, oh, you can't do this.
Yeah, but the BAS doctors were prepared to tell me if it was going to be a blanket no. So that's at least one thing.
Yeah, at least it's a quicker process on that end.
I was just going to jump in with a question that I had in general, and it kind of speaks to this point a little bit, which is obviously an API. This is largely voluntary work, and I think you're doing some fantastic things. But I was wondering about how much you intend to engage with these organizations to try and, lobby them to change policies, or lobby people that maybe do have positions of power to actually try and make some changes. I don't know if that's part of your scope or whether that might be coming into the future.
It is. We've already worked with a couple of organizations in the US to help with conference accessibility and sort of general accessibility at fieldwork and stuff. So one of them's PSECO, which is the acronym's gone out of my head, but it's like an early career association. And so they've been a massive ally for us to be able to, I suppose, suggest ways for accessibility. We've also had a couple of organizations based in California that we've worked with to understand more modern initiatives about, okay, if we've had somebody that's been refused to go to the polls, how can we still get them to help out with data analyses? Positives and negatives there, you'll find out on the survey if that's a technique that we want, but also the British Antarctic Survey. We've worked a lot with them trying to spearhead accessibility from very, like, I suppose we've been like, I guess we've sort of been helping newer PhD students become more accessible, so that as they work through the academic ladder, so to speak, they can practice accessibility as a second nature. And that's something we're big on. But I mean, if anyone in chat has any ideas of organizations that you think we should contact and help out, please provide them, because we would 100% do that. Yeah, totally.
Just to add on to what Angus was saying, obviously we're like you mentioned, we are voluntary. We are doing other stuff alongside this, so unfortunately we can't dedicate as much time and effort as we would like to, because this won't pay the bills. But we have very much gone on a let's just promote as much as we can. First of all, let's get everyone's feedback together, let's figure out what we want, and then we can make these points out, and we will be contacting these other organizations and all the people who are in charge of telling you whether or not you can go. So yeah, we've kind of been more on like a bottom-up approach at the moment, because if we work on who is the new people coming in and they're practicing this firsthand, and then almost making accessibility second nature to people, which it should be regardless, but current states of the world don't allow for that. So then then we'll start on that top-down approach and really trying to hammer home to the big bosses, I guess is a good way to put it.
And just as a follow-up, because I have the ability to have a follow-up question, I just wondered about talking about voluntary work and the fact that this is a kind of a thing on the side of your jobs. I wondered if you could just speak very briefly about how you feel about the fact that a lot of this stuff, and you have lots of organizations like Prosecco, like Apex, various other ECR networks that are really pushing these initiatives. And I work in Apex, and there's a lot of good stuff going on in this kind of space as well. I wondered if you could just say maybe a couple of words about how you feel, whether you feel as if maybe ECRs are disproportionately having to kind of take the weight of this, or whether you think more could be done by senior people.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. ECRs disproportionately having to do the work, because higher up people have maybe not experienced it, or maybe trying to think how to word this. If they are with disabilities and have faced these adversities, they've just gone, okay, fine, we'll just deal with it. Whereas more of the ECRs and people coming in now are realizing that they have the voice to speak up for what they want to do and why they think they are eligible to do it. So yeah, having all these other organizations, ECR networks, increasing their EDI outreach. And I see so much more these days about other, not even like ECR groups, but more just working groups doing more work in the EDI space. And it's incredible to see, because we're really helping to get that message across. Yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to add, Angus.
Yeah, I think much the same. You really nailed it with that. I guess what I've witnessed is the spanning multiple generations, whether or not you're an ECR or you're a senior principal, whatever, is that we're moving away from that traditional rhetoric of a polar researcher being a white, old, straight man. And that's something that's been so incredible to witness, because, as Charlotte said, there are other working groups out there like Creative Tuition, Minorities in Polar Research, Pride in Polar Research, that are all dedicated to changing this. And they're not just ECRs either, they're later stage researchers. So it's actually quite nice to witness other people who are in senior positions being able to help. But oh yeah, 100% ECRs are taking on a massive workload, and hopefully we'll sort it out. Hopefully, who knows? Maybe we will. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's not to say that there are many good senior researchers as well.
Oh,
just wanted to add that second point in.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from anyone else in the room? Daria, yeah.
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to offer my thanks to you, because I work in law, so I don't get to go on any field trips, and that means that I also don't get to think about these things. You know, my colleagues don't go unless it's for some conference, but you know, it's not to Antarctica, so it helps me see things differently. But also now being in ScAN, we have some, you know, travel support, and it makes me think really hard about, you know, how do we make sure that that support is provided with all of this in mind, and whether there's any additional support that we can provide to facilitate researchers with disabilities to participate in, whether it's field work or it's conference travel or, you know, anything else they need on their own terms. So thank you very much. A lot of food for thought for me, even though I don't go near any field work at all.
No, thank you very much for your kind words. I think.
Oh, sorry. Let me
Sorry,
just
go
add.
for it, Charlotte.
It's nice to have people who are not working in this space joining these calls, because, like you said, you're figuring out, you're learning about it and learning about these issues that people might be facing that you couldn't even imagine having to deal with yourself. And it really helps us to hammer home about having good allies within the space. So you can now reach out to people who you could see having these issues and be like, listen, I don't fully understand what you're going through, but I know about this. I can try and help as much as I can. And obviously with backgrounds, you can potentially get in contact with new people and stuff. So no, it's really nice that we can spread this message to non-scientists also who are not experiencing these things directly.
Yeah, I'm a social scientist.
Physical scientist, my bad.
Thanks, Daria. Any other questions from the room?
There was a question that I just spotted in chat a bit earlier on that I don't know if we've answered, sort of half answered it.
Which one was that?
From Alison Cook about RGBs of. Okay, I'll just answer that now. So our best sort of policy with this is assume your color palette doesn't work until you've had it checked. And there are multiple sites that I'll send after I finish talking into the chat, that you can actually make your own color palette that is accessible and is compliant to the WCAG guidelines. So in terms of maps, I also make a lot of maps. My biggest tip for you is use nice gradients, especially blue. Blue is one that I found, I mean, that's annoying if you're in the ocean, so we'll have to find a different color for that one. But my biggest thing was blue gradients were most universally accepted within the WCAG guidelines. But like really good blue gradients like navy, turquoise, massively bright blue type of thing. But I'll send some links in the chat now to some websites that I've used to create my own color palettes. Hopefully that will be useful. We need to make a terrestrial one, or ocean one, because blue won't work in the sea. I need to think of one now. Yeah, we need to think. Yeah, you can try it.
I mean, on that point, elevation maps can be really tricky because there are lots of pretty daunting elevation color scales out there, which I have definitely used and I know they're bad, but there aren't necessarily better options out there. So that would be really cool to kind of work on that.
Exactly. I also think just a last point is that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to have graphs that aren't digitally accessible. You know, we've all made mistakes. I've made mistakes. I still make mistakes. So don't hold yourself to this like really high standard and be like beating yourself up if you don't make a graph that's accessible. You know, we're all human. We don't need to constantly be criticizing ourselves. So if it's something you can do, great. But if you can't manage it, then write some great alt text or really explain the graph or do other accessible things to help out. So yeah, I'll send some links now.
Thanks, Angus. Yes, I think if there are no further questions, we'll bring this to a close. But I wanted to also say both to you, Angus, and Charlotte, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I think that is fantastic. I know that isn't necessarily easy, so I very much appreciated that from my side. And Gillian, yeah, I think Angus will send all the links either through us or we'll find a mechanism to do that.
There was one to the article and the survey as well, and I can't remember if there are some others that have gone by. So if you could collect up the whole lot, that would be great.
yeah, me and Angus can put a document together and get it sent across to you, William, and Daria organising, and then get that sorted.
Yep. Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Angus, for speaking. Thank you, Charlotte, for being on Q&A. This was a really useful discussion, really important topic. And thank you to everyone for joining. The next ScAN webinar will be, as I just get it up, on the 17th of January, where we'll be hearing about Arctic vessel traffic. So please come along to that as well. But in the meantime, have a great Christmas. Enjoy the rest of December. And thank you again to Angus for speaking.
Thank you all very much. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.